Okay, so we thought we'd sit down and we'd do a quick video to talk you through both heart rate guidance and power guidance for racing at 70.3 and iron distance triathlon. Prepared a little sheet here for you just to give you a quick overview. Just going to share this with you on the screen. So first up, when we're looking at power for 70.3 athletes, we're going to be looking for between 75 and 85% of your FTP. That's an overall average normalized power across the whole of your bike leg. And my guidance here is slower athletes are going to be at the lower end of that. So if you're going to be out there for a longer amount of time, you want to be looking for around the 75% of FTP. If you're going to be out there for a shorter amount of time, if you're a quicker athlete, if you're at the front pointy end of the pack, you're going to be looking more towards 85% of FTP. In terms of heart rate zones, how that stacks up, well, our slower athletes, we're going to be looking for sort of upper zone 2 heart rate. And for our faster athletes, we're going to be looking at mid zone 3, possibly even a little bit higher than that in terms of heart rate. Now, obviously, those are sort of overall averages for across the whole leg. We recognize that's going to go up and down because not very many of the 70.3 bike legs are just flat roads where you can ride at a constant power. So if you have long hills that are going to take between 5 and 20 minutes to get up, my guidance here is going to be to cap yourself at 90% of FTP, excuse me, or around the top of zone 3 heart rate. If you've got short, sharp, steep hills, well, we recognize that you're going to have to spike your power with those and do probably whatever is necessary to try and get you up the hill. Okay, but just bear in mind, you want to try and keep those power spikes as small as possible. When we're moving over into iron distance racing, our guidance here is going to be a little bit less, obviously to reflect the fact you're out there for longer. So we're looking for an overall normalized average power for our slower athletes of around the 65% of FTP mark. So if you're going to be out on your Ironman bike leg for sort of the 7.5 hour range, you want to be looking at 65% of FTP or the bottom of heart rate zone 2. If you're one of the faster athletes out there, you can be going up to about 75% of FTP or sort of the top of zone 2 heart rate. That's kind of guidance for athletes who are going to be finishing in around, say, 5 hours for the bike leg of an iron distance race. And everyone else needs to slot themselves in there somewhere in between. Obviously, slower athletes there are at the lower end of the power zone, faster athletes at the higher end. And again, in terms of heart rate, looking at the bottom of heart rate zone 2 for our slower athletes and the top of heart rate zone 2 for our faster athletes. Again, when we talk in terms of hills, because we recognize that the event is not just going to be a long flat race. On the longer hills that are going to take 5 to 20 minutes to climb, cap yourself at 85% of FTP on those longer hills. And again, for the shorter, sharper hills, you're going to have to do whatever you have to do to get up them in some cases. But just remember, we want to try and minimize our energy output. So go down into your lowest gearing and try and get up them, saving as much energy as you can. Think of your energy like a box of matches. You want to burn as few matches as you possibly can as you go through these events. Now, I've got a document that I'm going to share with you here. This is a representation of training stress. And it can be very, very complicated, but just think of it in terms of this. What we're trying to do is work out how much energy you're going to expend when you're out on the leg of your Ironman triathlon. So think of it just in simple terms of energy. The harder you go, the more energy you're going to burn up. And quite frankly, the more carbohydrate you're going to burn up. The higher percentage of FTP you put out, the more of your stored carbohydrate you're going to burn. And we want to minimize that. We want to save as much of your stored carbohydrate as we possibly can for the marathon. So these different colored boxes here on the screen represent, firstly, I'll circle these here with my mouse. The kind of solid gray area is about what we think is right for a well-paced Ironman bike leg where you're going to run well. So we're looking in terms of about 270 to 280 training stress score points, if you understand what that is. If you don't, that's fine, but it just gives you an example here. An athlete who's riding at, say, 77% of their functional threshold, who manages to ride a 4.5 hour bike leg, getting those 267 stress points here, is roughly equivalent to an athlete who is doing a 6 hour bike leg Again, same stress points there, 269 stress points, but they're riding at 67% of their FTP. So that can be a little bit confusing, but it's to illustrate a point here. If you read about the pros who are doing their bike leg in 4.5 hours or maybe even faster, that's only going to be generating 267 stress points for them. And that's because they've got a massive engine that can produce a huge amount of power. You've got to recognize that if you're out there for possibly 2 hours or even more longer than they are, you are going to have to ride at a smaller percentage of your FTP, because what we're trying to do is sort of equalize out the energy expenditure that you're out there for. So again, the pros out there for a short period of time, yes, they're riding at a higher functional threshold percentage than you are, but they're only accumulating the same training stress points as you because they've got a much bigger engine to work with. Okay, so just to go back to this document again, for our iron distance athletes, we're looking for an overall normalized power of between 65 to 75% of our FTP in order to, if you like, the aim of this is to make sure that you run well off the bike, not that you put a really good bike split. So I'm not saying you can't go harder than this. You absolutely can. For lots of people, you'll be looking at that number going, 65% of FTP is hardly anything. It feels like I'm not even really moving. And you're right, it doesn't feel very hard, but that's a reasonable number from the hundreds of athletes we've seen. It's a reasonable number to expect that you will then go on to run well off the bike. I'm sure you'll know lots of examples of people who have put out really blazing bike splits and then had to walk the marathon. And that's what we want you having to avoid to do if we possibly can. Okay, so I hope this helps you out. Hope it gives a bit more background to the reason that we give these sort of percentages. And hopefully, if you trial this in training and you get it right, you'll be having a successful marathon. And that's ultimately, or a successful run leg, and that's ultimately the reason that we've got you trying to pace your bike leg well, so you finish that feeling strong and you have a successful run. All right, guys, I hope that helps you out, and yeah, we'll speak to you all again soon. Cheers.